Off. There we go. Now it works? Okay. Anyways, we're looking at the today chain of tradition from Masechet Avot. You have it on your chart as well, although it wasn't clearly delineated. But now, with the sections that are circled, you can see how it goes in parallel to the political leadership, the spiritual chain of tradition, bringing us to the period of the sages, that all-important period of the sages. Where do the words of the sages get written down and collected? Where? Yeah, that's their name, the sages. Where? What books? How do the in Mishnah? What else? Right, like we're learning now, Mishnah. This is Mishnah, even though it's in a Siddur. It's a section of the Mishnah. And then in the Gemara as well, it gets explained. Where else? Midrash. And in the Midrash as well. All these are material from the Chazal. And it can hear me from here. So I don't know what this recording is going to be worth. Some sound, no sound, but all right, it's there. You hear what I'm saying? It's the words of the sages. The Rambam says you can't say that it's nonsense. So it must be that you're the idiot because you don't know how to read it. Because you don't know when to take it literally and when to take it as a parable, and when they're giving you wisdom, when they're giving you traditions. You have to learn how to study Midrash. You think you could just read it like a newspaper and say, this I like, this I don't like. It's the words of the sages. You treat it with the utmost respect. But you have to know how to read it. Hananel, was that your question?
Yes.
Yes.
If someone say, affirming Zionim, till now, it just says it's not correct. What should I say?
Good question. So let's continue a little further. So the words of the sages, we said, is gold, right? That's like layer of authority after layer of authority. The Tanaim have more authority than the Amoraim. But all of this, everything we mentioned up till now, we can't really argue with. We have to accept it. We maybe have to understand it. What are we left with if that's written in stone? Well, what can we do? Well, after this period, really, we don't even have additional layers. That's the top of the cake. What we can do maybe is we can add some icing. Commentary, exactly. We can interpret. We can maybe put some cherries on top. Maybe a candle or two.
So Geonim or like...
Everything after the period of the sages doesn't have the same authority. What do we have? Look on the chart. We have 1,500 years of Jewish history. 3 periods. Geonim, Rishonim, and Achronim. You see that? Back on the chart. Geonim, Rishonim, and Achronim. What do? They also write books, but not primary books. Everything after that is called primary literature and secondary literature. Everything we described up till now can be considered primary. Everything after that, secondary. The Gaonim wrote many books and many, they authored many explanations, but they're primarily interpreting the Talmud and the words of the sages, the Midrash, the Talmud, everything, the Tanaitic literature. So, Gaonim don't have the authority to say that piece of the Gemara is wrong. Just like the Amoraim didn't have the authority to say that the Tanaim are wrong. But they can't say, we are going to follow, if there's a contradiction in the Talmud, we should follow this opinion and not that opinion. Or the way to interpret the Talmud is that, this is primary and this is secondary, or something like that, from within the Talmud. But everything after the Talmud was based on the Talmud. The Gaonim, and they created the first type of literature, that we find after the Talmud was completed. When was the Talmud completed? Year 500, exactly. So after that was the period called the period of the Gaonim. Until when? Until approximately year 1000. So 500 years. You know what the most popular book in those 500 years was? Responsa. What are responsa? It comes from the word response. In Hebrew, she'elot utshuvot. Questions and answers. Shoot is an acronym for she'elot utshuvot. What were these questions and answers about? What were they full of? Why questions and answers? Well, I'll tell you. The Talmud, after year 500, it got sealed, it got edited, and it got delivered all around the world to the Jewish people that were now dispersed. They're no longer only in Babylon or the land of Israel. Those centers got weaker and weaker. The Jewish people were spreading to Italy, to North Africa,
Spain,
all over Spain, all over Europe. And they were reading the Talmud and they said, wait, I don't know what it means. I can't understand what the bottom line is. How do we practice this in our day? And who did they ask? The Geonim. The Geonim. The Geonim is the name of these rabbis who were the leaders in this period. And they wrote them back. They didn't have SMS. They didn't have telephones. So they wrote a letter. Please, great rabbis from Babylon. Geonim were Babylonian rabbis. Please guide us how to practice Judaism in Rome, how to practice Judaism in Morocco, in Yemen. We don't know. We need help. We need guidance from you. And they wrote a letter in response. It's known as the Responsa literature. It's a collection of all those letters written by those rabbis. Primarily, this was in the first period after the closing of the Talmud. There's lots and lots of responsa. But until today, people are sending questions to rabbis, and the rabbis are answering. So there's responsa in all three periods until today.
And Weinberg, when does Rashi come in?
Soon.
Okay.
Okay? Of course, Gaonim also wrote other books of commentaries and essays on various topics. So all these types of literature is what happened after the Talmud was sealed. Halacha codes started to get written. One of the first ones was by Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi from Fez. Rabbi Yitzchak was a great leader in Morocco, and he wrote the first book of halacha. Maybe he said, I'll take the Talmud and I'll take out all the Agadic sections, and I want to give you only the bottom line from all these discussions on the Talmud. He called it Halachot of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. Halachot Harif. He had an acronym. It was known as RIF. RIF.
One of the three pillars.
You will see later on this book became very prominent, very important halachic work. One of the first halachic works, law codes, was the halachot of the RIF. He lived just at the end of the Gaonic period, about a year 1000. The next period, mostly we have the words of the Gaonim in responsa. But then the next period became, let's put all those laws and all those letters into a book that can be used. That's the beginning of the law codes. Law codes, I'd say, got most popular in the period of the Rishonim. Period 6. You have it on your chart, period 6. The period of the Rishonim, the most famous one is maybe Rambam, but another one is Rashi. Rashi was a Rishon, lived in 1100. Rambam lives in 1200. Okay? So these are Rishonim. The Rishonim, they wrote responsa, they wrote law codes, and they wrote perushim, commentaries. You could say, if I use my wedding cake, now it's getting even more commentaries. Commentaries are these beautiful, decorations. There's commentaries on the Chumash, there's new commentaries on the Nevi'im, new commentaries on the Midrashim, on the Mishnah, there's commentaries on the Gemara. But this is all commentaries. What about this birthday cake or wedding cake? It gives birth for the first time after I said, this is it. This is only 2 books, right? The Tanakh is book 1, and the Talmud is book 2. These are the 2 books. 1, 2. That's all there is. New books were created. You could say a derivative. Let me just make room here. The later books, after the period of the sages, there were other books written, but again, they don't have the same authority. We're going to have to draw another line. Here we have an example, a book called the 14 books of the Rambam, Maimonides. This is called the Yad. Yad equals 14. Yad HaChazakah, the strong arm of the Rambam. That's one book that he wrote. It's a halacha code. There's another code that there's only 4 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is called the Tur, the columns, 4 columns. The 4 columns. These are books from everything before that. We have another layer of scholarship. Until finally, there is another layer of authority between, this is the Rishonim period. They have tremendous authority as well. And then the final period is the period of the Acharonim. We have additional books, but again, they're going to be with lesser authority than the period of the first 500 years of the century. Is that clear? Yes.
I have a question. When we study Mishnah, how do we know what is the today authority? What is the today halakha?
It's very difficult.
I'm kidding.
We're standing over here, right?
Yeah.
How can you know?
Because it's different when they discuss in the Mishnah.
Of course,
Today
the Mishnah gets discussed by the Gemara, and the Gemara gets interpreted, and by the Gaonim. The Gaonim gets understood again and further developed in the period of the Rishonim, and then again for 500 years in the period of Acharonim, and we're over here at the end of 2,000 years. So, absolutely right. We study all these primary texts. Right? These are the primary texts. Everything up till year 1000 is primary. But you cannot confuse that. Don't think it's a guideline to what to do today. Because there's 1,000 years, an additional 1,000 years of commentary and development. 1,500 actually.
It's 500.
Say again? Well, the Gaonim are, there's another layer here of Gaonim that I sort of skipped out here. Gaonim is the first 500 years after the, right, this is 500 to 1,000 is the Gaonim. Got that? So this is the first 2,000 years, really. Right, from minus 3,500 to, minus 1,500 to 500. It's 2,000 years. The first foundational, primary texts were created in the first era, first 2,000 years, up until year 500, and everything since then is considered to be secondary texts, based on these building blocks of the Tanakh and the Talmud. The Gaonim, Rishonim, Achronim, we're 1,500 years later. So we studied the primary text first. Right now, we opened up. We have it open in front of us. So Mishnah. Mishnah is the basis. But it's not the final word because, of course, the tradition developed for another 1,500 years. So when we navigate, when a rabbi gets asked a question today, he has to navigate all of Jewish tradition. What do the Achronim have to say? He could ask his rabbis, or his rabbis, see how they discussed it. But he also has to see how the Rishonim discussed it. And what are they all discussing? Maybe there's a letter from the Gaonim about the subject. And maybe you have to understand what the basis of the whole discussion is, what it says in the Talmud, which is all based on the Tanakh. You have to be an expert on all this, thousands of years of literature, to be able to give an honest and true answer. What does Judaism have to say about AI? It's a new question. You look for precedents, you look for hints in the entire gamut of Jewish scholarship.
They go through all the stages. I mean, they go
Sure, yeah. Maybe there's a pasuk that will guide you in the Chumash. Maybe there's a little reference in Tehillim, which references something automatic. I don't know. And then there's this questions. There's Mishnayot, which deal with intelligence and authority and throughout you have to really. We can't take one piece without the other. Okay, now you get it. Hana.
About the Talmud. Who's the first one written down? The person, I don't know.
So if you look on the chart, it says the Talmud was written by the Amoraim, right in the middle. Amoraim. They were the sages of the Talmud from year 200 to 500.
I wrote it down before that, and then Rabbi Yochanan ben Nakha.
He was one of the Tanaim.
He was the first one written the Talmud.
No, I don't know who was first. First, I would say was maybe Rab and Shmuel. There's a Talmud in the land of Israel. There's a Talmud in Babel. There were hundreds of rabbis, and in the end, the most famous Amora. I gave you one example was Abaye, but the one who is known as the author of the Talmud is Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi. He lived at the end of the Amoraic period. And if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is known as the author of the Mishnah, Rav Ashi could be called the author of the Gemara. Rav Ashi. Does that answer your question? But who was the first Amora mentioned? I imagine that students of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, like Chia, could be considered to be an Amora. There are people that are on the transition between the Amorite period and the Tanite period. Levi.
This one, I wrote in my book, Jerusalem, when they are in Jerusalem, he is the first person who wrote it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nakha, something like that.
You think he was the first of the Amoraim?
Yeah.
I have to check. Rabbi Yochanan Nakha, I don't know that necessarily he was the first. I actually happen to have a chart of Amoraim right here. Let's see. And I can share this with you. This is the Amoraim. Pass these around. I have a chart like this about Tanaim as well. But you see here the top of your chart in Eretz Israel. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was the Tana, right? The end of the Tanaim, he had three major students: Oshaya, Bar Kapara, and Chia. And then the period of Amoraim starts with, I see Chanina Bar Chamaz there, Yanai, and Yoshua ben Levi are known as the first generation of Amoraim in Eretz Israel. In parallel to that, you can see there's a whole 6 or 7 generations of Amoraim in Babylonia at the same time. Of course, sadly, after the 5th generation, there was no more scholarship in the land of Israel. The Jerusalem Talmud gets closed, unfinished, even before the Babylonian by a few generations.
Because of the Byzantine.
Yeah, they were the Jewish community couldn't survive any longer under the Christian rule. Yeah.
So the above number one Hanina is
There's sort of a transition between Tanaim and Amoraim. It's a transition period. Chia, in some ways, could be considered to be a Tana. In some ways, he's considered to be an Amora.
But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is
Clearly Tana. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the last of the Tanaim. So I don't see who you're mentioning, Rav Yochanan Nafcha, on this chart. Yochanan bar Nafcha is the second generation. You see that, Hananel? Do you see number 2 on the chart I gave you? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nafcha. That's the second generation of Amoraim. So I wouldn't say he's the first. The first generation of Amoraim, I would say Chanina, Yanai, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rav and Shmuel in Babylon. And you see Rav Ashi in 6, in generation 6. It says here, the final redaction of the Jerusalem Talmud, and finally, a little bit later, in year 500, the final redaction of the Babylonian Talmud. It's a nice chart. I'm glad Yehoshua ben Nafcha is on the chart, but it's not in the first generation, Hananel. I don't know who told you that. I don't know who told you that.
The CE, the 297 CE.
297. You're right. Okay, 297. But Amoraim started before that, in 226, according to the chart. Right? You see, it says there's before him. There was Amoraim before Rabbi Yehoshua ben Nafcha. As important as he was, I don't think you could call him the first one. Okay?
So these are generations, 1, 2.
Yeah.
So there are 2 in the same generation.
Yeah, quite a few in each generation. Yeah, there's much more than that. There are hundreds, but these are the most important ones. It's just to get you an idea, right? So there's a lot of details, but I'm trying to give you the big picture before we get into all the details.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All 3 of those, they're called transitional characters. In between Tanaim and Amoraim.
Yes. Maybe he can write it, something like that. But I mean, I'm not sure, but Raf, I want to ask you that. I already asked everyone, to
help
make
you.
Sure that.
Yeah, good to ask.
Yeah.
It's good to ask. But you have to get the right answers. You can be careful who you ask.
2 generations or something like that. After 2 generations,
Yeah.
3rd generation, right? Maybe he can write it only oral or something like that. Maybe he's one who who's the first Christian, something like that. I want to ask him. We don't know.
Whether their writings were written down at that time or later, it depends. Probably there were some notes, but it didn't get finally into the book so quickly. Stephen, see here, I brought this. We can plug this in over there, and then it'll be ready for the next time. There's in the plug. There's actually a place for it. Maybe unplug the other one. Yeah, but it might not work if you have 2 at the same time. I think that might be a problem. You can see. Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
It's working. Great. Okay. No, just leave it there. We're not going to use it. Just for it to charge. Okay. Back to your homework. Any questions? Things you didn't know from the homework? Yes, Avi.
Zugot.
Zugot is pairs. Pairs. The pairs, which we just covered earlier. I showed you in the Pirkei Avot. Yossi and Yossi is the first pair. Hillel and Shammai the last pair. That's the Zugot. Who else did their homework and wants to ask a question? Yosef?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm because I was not able to search for the Mefarshim and Parshanim.
So they're commentators.
Commentators.
Mefarshim and Parshanim mean commentators.
Yeah.
And the different forms of the same word, right? Perush. Perush is a commentary. So Mefarshim or Parshanim are commentators. There's a little bit of a convention here that we use Parshanim for
interpretation.
The first Parshanim on Tanakh, and Mefarshim for after Tanakh. So Parshanim usually is the version of the word that we use for commentators on Tanakh, and for everything else we call them Mefarshim. It's the same word really. Bottom line is they are Perushim. Perushim are commentaries, the writers of commentaries. That's a little convention that Parshanim is used for Tanakh, Mefarshim for everything else. Yeah.
Until the Achronim?
All the way now. Another question on the homework, Stephen.
Yeah, what is this? Midos She HaTorah Nideret Shet Bahem.
The answer is in number
Principle.
2.
Second principle of
Number 2.
derivation.
Oh,
Number 2. See the last line of number 2?
then.
These are the 13 principles. The way the Torah is nidreshet. Drash.
Okay.
Exegesis.
Derived. We derive stuff from the Torah.
Okay, yeah.
13 principles. Yes, sir.
Acharonim.
The last period on the chart is called the Acharonim period.
Okay.
Right? As opposed to Rishonim, the earlier commentaries, there's it's a strange thing. Why? So these layers we sort of understand. The Tanakh is going to be more authoritative than the Talmud. And once the Talmud is sealed, we understand that the Talmud is going to be more authoritative than the Gaonim and the Rishonim. But it's so curious why we have this line over here. About 1500, there's an unwritten line in the sand between authority of the earlier commentaries and the later authorities. Right? And
It's a big historical period, 1500. I mean, a lot's happening in the world, everything's changing.
It's a Renaissance.
yeah, maybe because of that, people after that upheaval, I don't know exactly why, but maybe after that period, people said, we're not on the same level as the earlier commentaries. I'm going to be arguing with Rashi, with Rambam, with the Tosfot, with all these great Rishonim. We don't have the authority anymore. We interpret their words, we study their words, we discuss them, but we don't contradict directly. No Achron will say, I disagree with Rashi. Well, there are a few exceptions, but there is this sort of strange line which got drawn between the Rishonim and the Acharonim. It's not absolute. It's not as strong as before the Talmud and after the Talmud. That's ironclad. You don't have the authority of the Talmud. Right? Only in the period of the Talmud, what were they doing? Midrash, with the 13 principles. Deriving things from the Tanakh with the 13 principles, right? Midrash was only allowed, even primarily it stopped after the Tanaim. Even the Amoraim themselves didn't make up a new midrash that to derive a new law. This type of derivation of laws from the verses with the 13 principles of derivation is really only in the Tanaitic period. After that, for sure not. You don't have the same authority. You interpret, you discuss, you try to come up with new, and believe it or not, there's tons you can do. Even when you're respecting these layers of authority, you're able to be creative and give interpretations and limitations on the previous stated laws and material. Okay, who was asking a question? That was Rishonim, Achronim. What else? Any other questions? Yeah.
But do you think, humanism in the Renaissance had an effect on the commentaries of the scholars about Achronim?
Yeah, I think there's always influence, but
Did their view of certain things change in a way?
I think it had to. We live in the historical period. We're influenced by the historical period. However, what we're describing here is the approach which says there is an internal development, right, from Midrash, from the Tanakh to the Talmud, and it's based on all these interpretations, right? We're giving interpretations, icing on the cake, and there's a holistic internal mechanism for the development of these ideas. Now, your question is, what about influences from outside,
Right.
on this entire process? So, I think it would be naive to say that there's no influence. But I think it's wrong also to say there's no internal consistency. It's all influence. Oh, we just took this from the Christians, and we took this from the Arab cultures that we were near, and we took it all from the outside. You're ignoring the development that we've been describing. That's an internal development from the Torah, from Sinai. There's an internal development of Jewish tradition. It's not only, we're just influenced, we're spitting back what we heard in the media. There could be some influence, but it's maybe on the outer side. There's some. It's not going to change the core of the tradition, which is an internal development from the Jewish people.
Can we assume that Josephus is one of the influence?
Definitely, he was influenced. He actually converted. He was a Jew who was a traitor. He turned against the Jews in the Roman period. He became a historian on behalf of the enemy. And the Romans were the enemy.
What was his name?
Josephus.
Josephus.
His name was Yosef ben Matityahu, Jewish name, and he changed his name to Josephus Flavius. He took on a Roman name.
Well, he lived in the court of the Caesar. I mean, he was there.
Yeah, and he spent time in Israel. He was one of the rebel leaders in Israel, and he decided to change.
Everybody else around him committed suicide, and he decided to.
That's right. That's right. Amazing. But his works are of tremendous historical value because he lived at the time of the Second Temple. He saw the Second Temple. He describes it, and we have descriptions from the Talmud, right? From the Tanaim lived in the time of the Second Temple. Only in year 70 was it destroyed. So there was Tanaim from before year 70, from year 0, right? And the pairs, the words of the pairs are in the Mishnah. So we have descriptions internally, but it helps. So long ago, it helps that we have this external historian. He was sort of, and he understood somewhat Judaism better than the Romans, who were not Jewish. So his works are important, but they're not. He, like I said, he was a traitor. Yeah.
Halakha was written in which period? Halakha.
Halakha and Agadah go together. Halakha means laws,
Yeah.
and beliefs, history, values. All that was always part from the beginning, from the foundational period, through the period of. You need a chart. You don't have yours?
Yes.
I'll print another one for you. You could have this
It's
one.
okay, I think.
Yeah, okay. Anyways, Halakha and Agadah, there's in the Chumash. There's Halakha and Agadah in this period. There's Halakha and Agadah in the Nevi'im. There's Halakha and Agadah in the Mishnah, and in the Gemara, and in the Gaonim, and in the Rishonim, and Achronim. There's always Halakha. So you ask, when was Halakha written? It's all there. The first time we have a separate book from the Talmud only halacha, we have here 2 examples of the Rambam, in the Rishonim period. We have books of halacha separate that are pulled from the Talmud, from the birthday cake, from the birthday cake, the layer cake of the primary materials. All halacha books are secondary materials. It's really only in the secondary period we find this division. Some books only halacha, and some books only Haggadah. Before that, in the primary texts, they're all mixed. We have halacha and Haggadah in all the primary texts. Is that clear? Yeah.
About Shulchan Aruch is the first one, right?
No.
No?
No. Shulchan Aruch was written around 1500. The Rambam lived in 1200.
Who is the first one?
It's hard to say. Of the major, most important ones, I mentioned before, Hilchot Harif, the laws of the Rav Yitzchak Al-Fassi from Morocco, and then the Rambam, and then the Tur, the Arba Turim, the 4 columns, and then came Rav Yosef Karo, and he said, I want to write a new halachic work based on all the above, the 3 primary sources. He said, I'm going to take from the Rif, I'm going to take from the Rambam, I'm going to take from the Tur which quotes his father was the Rosh. And I'm going to make a new book, and he called that the Shulchan Aruch. That's on your page. Shulchan Aruch is a new version of the Tur, of the 4 columns. But it's too much material at once. Too much material. Any other questions on the page? Yeah.
So number 44.
Number 44. What's number 44? Who were the Savoraim?
Visitors.
What does that mean?
They are.
What did you say?
Editors.
What did they do?
They edited the.
They edited the Talmud. Exactly. They edited the Talmud. Savoraim were known as sort of in between the Gaonim and the Talmud and the Amoraim. Amoraim, Savoraim, Gaonim. Savoraim sort of edited the Talmud so it became usable by the rest of the generations afterwards. Savoraim, small, about 100 years, only about 100 years. In between Amoraim and Gaonim. Another question, yes?
Is it better to start from Tanakh and then you go to Talmud, Mishnah, Gemara, or from the back of the Shulchan Aruch, then you go?
The answer is both.
Okay.
You have to do both. It's such a basic foundation that we study the primary texts. So we study the Tanakh, study the Mishnah, we study the Gemara. But of course, we live 2,000 years later. So the language is different. It's hard to access. There's so much other material that has to be understood that came after the Talmud. And so you can't have only one or the other.
No, for beginners, like where should we start from?
So for beginners also, you have to start making your headway on the primary texts. Yeah, for sure. Everybody has to be, even the greatest rabbi, he always studies the primary texts. Of course, there's a lot of other material to focus on, and that might be easier to access. And here you are, listening to me, sort of navigating, translating for you. We're not only studying Mishnah. So I think there has to be a combination of studying the primary text yourself, but also studying the later works which sort of explain them and give you the context and make it a little more relevant to our historical situation. So we need the later commentaries. And also you need to know, bottom line, what to do. If you just start studying Mishnah, it won't help you to know what the halacha is. You need all the thousands of years of discussions of the Mishnah to know what the halacha today is. So you can't only the primary text, and you can't only, read short form summaries. Do this, don't do that. You're missing out on the entire tradition. So there's a lot to do. Other questions? Other questions? You got everything else here on the page? Who are poskim?
What about Idot Ha-Mizra?
1 second. Who are the poskim?
Decisors?
What is a decisor?
Make a decision?
Exactly. What's a decision?
If it's halacha or not.
That's right. Halachic decisor. Halachic, somebody who decides the halacha. People get asked questions in halacha and they give the answers. They decide the halacha. Sometimes there's a court. If it's a debate between two people, there's a court of law that makes the decisions. Sometimes the rabbi is ordained to give psak, lifsok, poski halacha. It comes from the word to cut. So decide the law is such and not otherwise. Hananel, what did you ask about?
Idot Ha-Mizra.
Idat HaMizrach means communities, ethnic communities from the east. India, Philippines. But primarily it means Syria, Iraq, Iranian communities. There's not too many Jewish communities in the Philippines. But east. Mizrach means east. Eidot are ethnic communities. Okay? Got that? Israel, how you doing? It's getting clear now? It's getting clearer and clearer? Hopefully. I'm going to give you a new version of this Bezat Hashem soon. And every once in a while we go back to review the basics. I think we added this idea of the primary text versus the secondary text today. That's an important thing to realize. And we saw in the Mishnah and Avot this chain of tradition of the spiritual leadership. To be continued. Bezat Hashem. Have a great day. Okay. Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Matsuyan.
Sorry about this. Get on this tonight.
It's okay.
I have to put an alarm right.
Phone's like, right. It's
After work, I'm like.
It's new to be a student and not a teacher. Alright? It's different.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the Jewish people?
A little bit. Very little.
What is that?
It's a good question. It's not clear. Some kind of a sort of ethno-religious group.
They're
Ethnicity, and they have some kind of a religion as well, which is secret.
yes. They don't even know.
No.
Like they have like a circles. I lived in Haifa for a while, and there's like a community next to Haifa.
Right.
And they don't call themselves Muslims,
Right.
but they're from a Shia community in Egypt.
Do we have the time?
Yes.
They celebrate
quarter
when
to
the
one.
Muslims celebrate the Sunni and the Shia when they celebrate.
That's we can meet at 1:45.
No, this is the other one, the other big one.
Okay, before lunch. Okay.
Eid al-Adha.
Coming to
I think it's Eid al-Adha with the slaughter.
Come in.
my room.
So the Druze
Well,
they
yeah,
celebrate
you're-
the same because they believe that Yishmael is bad.
For me or for you?
No, Jews and Christians believe that
Thank you.
Yitzchak
But,
was banned by Abraham.
You have stomach
Right,
pain.
well, the Muslims they believe it was Ishmael.
You said you had stomach pain. You
So
said
this is when they slaughter,
Shirutin.
and the Druze they also
That was
celebrate
today.
holiday.
Because of the,
But because of their status here in Israel, where they serve in the army,
Okay,
the
speak
police,
later. But
they don't even, and they speak Arabic. Arabic is their first language. They don't even consider themselves Arabs. They have like a special bracket that they're Jews.
myself, you know,
Um,
It's similar to demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw Jews and like What's that? And they're not allowed
Okay,
to go.
great. Thank you.
I dated this girl from Venezuela, and she was a Druze. Like, she used to be like.
Well, like George Clooney's wife.
Yeah.
Is Jews, which is forbidden.
Right.
They're
you
not.
can't
No. And they're
bananas.
really violent. I mean, the
Really?
Druze, they killed a lesbian girl from the community 2 weeks ago
What?
because she came out as lesbian. Her brothers,
It's awful.
yeah, it's terrible, and they're hardcore soldiers. But one of the reasons they serve the army is they like to give the Palestinians are Sunni.
Oh.
And again, like the Druze, you also have them in Lebanon and
Right.
in Syria.
Right.
And the Druze are like also related to the what they call in Syria. The president of Syria, what's his name? Assad.
Yeah.
He has a community, and they're like Shia, this mixed with Christianity. It's like-
Shalonian?
I forget their name now. Like they,
Someone M maybe? Miss something? Like,
I can Google it.
I think I know what you're talking about.
The Shia, like the basic split in Islam is about
Muhammad's brother-in-law or something. Like,
Ali.
Yeah, who ascended the power after his death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but it's also ethnic. All the Arabs they follow like because the Arabs tribes they elected, I forget his name now, but he conquered Saudi Arabia and blah blah blah. But then the Arabs later conquered the Persians,
The assassinates.
and they identify with Ali. And the Shia are all Persian.
Right.
I mean, and today Iran is the base of. There's only like 100 million Shia in all the world,
Yeah.
and like more than nearly a billion are
I think
Sunni.
Qatar or some shit.
No, Bahrain.
Ah, that's the one.
Bahrain is the people are Shia, but the government is a Sunni,
Ah.
and the security forces are Sunni. It's a British creation.
Lots of
Most of the Middle East is
Yeah.
Jordan, the
Yeah.
King of Jordan. So there's the thing with Ali,
Right.
and I googled Syria, and they also the Druze. Like I